In the south of Russia, between Europe and Asia, towers a mighty mountain range, the Greater Caucasus. The influence of these mountains reaches far down into the valleys. From the glaciers of the main ridge to the canyons by the Caspian Sea, a wilderness with an unbelievable diversity. Craggy, shrouded in legend, and even today, largely unexplored. Europe's mountain worlds are the stuff of legend. The Pyrenees, the Alps, and the extensive Carpathian Arc traverse the continent from west to east. At the eastern edge, however, beyond the Crimea and the Black Sea, appears a 1,000-kilometer-long mountain range that puts everything else in the shade, the Greater Caucasus, which has more than a dozen peaks higher than the highest Alp. The mountains begin right behind the spa city of Sochi. Its proximity to the Black Sea makes the West Caucasus one of the snowiest regions in Europe. A stone's throw away from the busy coastal metropolis lie magical primeval forests that, in late autumn, are already thickly covered with snow. The forests are home to the last Caucasian wisents. The icy cold doesn't bother them at all. But their food is increasingly hard to find under layer upon layer of snow, and twigs are a poor substitute. Soon, these animals, weighing nearly a ton, won't be able to cover their daily energy needs. Today, there are once again about 500 wisents. At the end of the 1920s, they were extinct in the wild. Only releasing reverse-bred creatures ensured their return. Driven by hunger and instinct, the herd starts moving. The animals sense that the ground will soon be covered in 3 or 4 meters of snow or more. Too much even for Europe's biggest land mammal. At some point, the alpha bull gives a signal, and a long, arduous trek begins. The migration is uphill, out of the low-lying clouds until well over the tree line. Up here there is less snow, but it is colder and more exposed. An icy, high-altitude wasteland, inhospitable and barren. The herd moves higher and higher. What is it that drives them onwards? Many high-altitude valleys are snowed in and dangerous. One false move, and the cumbersome animals could fall or sink into a crevasse. Other herds join the trek, moving across endless expanses of snow. At the end of their climb, the wisents reach the territory of the chamois. In the white wilderness, even these huge animals look tiny and lost. But they hold out. What are they waiting for? The answer comes with the southerly winds. Towering clouds collide heavily with the mountains and stick fast. The steep mountainsides are no obstacle for the wind. Within minutes, the plateau is hit by a storm, accelerated by icy downdrafts. It ends as quickly as it began. The sky over the plateau remains miraculously clear. An area of high pressure sees off the clouds. The winter sun can now warm the plateau, newly freed from snow. Well preserved under the icy blanket, the grasses are still nutritious. For a short moment, summer comes to the Caucasian winter. It now becomes clear why it was essential for the wisents to weather the storm. Only at this altitude can they find pasture land in the winter and thus survive the cold season. Surprisingly, the meadows at 3,000 meters in the West Caucasus are ideal winter grazing for large vegetarians. The Devil's Gate provides a suitably spectacular backdrop. To the north of the Caucasus lie extensive plains in the rain shadow of the main range. Here the steppes of Kalmykia begin, with their very special inhabitants. Saiga antelopes are steppe dwellers. They prefer to be in the open, as they seem to be permanently on the run, regardless of what sets them off. Winter in the steppes is hard, although they lie 3 kilometers below the wisents' pasture land. The saiga's trunk-like proboscis was for many years a mystery to science. Today we know that it provides the animals with a kind of air conditioning. To protect the lungs of these long-distance runners, the icy air of the steppes is moistened and warmed in their conspicuous nasal sacs. If one approaches the Caucasus from the north, one can't miss the twin peaks of Mount Elbrus, at over 5,600 meters high. Standing to one side of the main range, Europe's highest mountain towers majestically over the foothills. A dormant volcano which is a good 800 meters higher than Mont Blanc. Beyond the other double summits of Mount Ushba in Georgia, Europe gradually becomes Asia. Hard to imagine that this boulder-strewn landscape could support life. But towards the end of April, loud calls echo through the mountains. Caucasian snowcocks. They live in the stony crags up to the vegetation line. Early travelers called the shy birds mountain turkeys. The ibexes are nervous. Spring is avalanche season. Thousands of tons of snow thunder down into the valleys, turning mountainsides into death zones. It's unclear whether animals have an inner warning system for avalanches, a sort of sixth sense. If they do, in the Caucasus at least, it doesn't always seem to help, with many animals falling victim to avalanches. The snowcocks certainly aren't bothered. The ibexes hesitate. Will the snow hold? It's much faster descending the soft surface of a thawed-out snowfield than a slope of scree. The ibexes of the Caucasus are also called turs. The females form small herds away from the adult males. In spring, almost all the females give birth and are thus even more cautious than usual. Bears, wolves, or lynx aren't usually found so high up, but when a lot of young are around, it's tempting for predators to try and climb up here. The kids plunge head over heels down the mountainside, good practice for emergencies and always within sight of their mother. Such happy capering is often short-lived. In spring, phases of good weather may only last for a short while. There's no trusting the seasons here. Within the space of 24 hours, it can turn from autumn to a hot summer's day, and then to deepest winter. Storms and plunging temperatures are part of everyday life here. This is probably the reason that many animals that we know from the Alps, above all marmots, haven't established themselves in the Caucasus. The combination of the region's rich landscapes and its harsh climate have nevertheless produced an enormous diversity of wildlife. In the eastern foreland of Dagestan lies a gigantic wandering sand dune, the Saricum. 260 meters high and around a kilometer long, the dune is a miniature version of the huge deserts of Central Asia, here on the edge of Europe. A toad-headed agama. In times of danger, the agama does a disappearing act. Like agamas, long-eared hedgehogs have their largest populations in Central Asia, with a European outpost here in the eastern Caucasus. Their striking ears are not only used to hear with, but also regulate the animal's body temperature. The female has but one aim in mind. As their name implies, wandering dunes are constantly on the move, driven by the wind, without which the dune would be long overgrown. No plant can put down roots in this non-stop sandblasting. The agamas have adapted. Special rows of scales protect their eyes and nasal openings. Away from the sandstorm, in the basement of the dune, the hedgehog suckles its young. Long-eared hedgehogs are extremely fertile animals. In good years, litters can be up to 10 strong. In this case, the mother only has 2 babies to look after, but even then she needs the occasional break. In a few days, the baby hedgehogs will be undertaking their first excursions. In the meantime, they just try and avoid painful perforations. The morning after the storm is calm and promises to be a hot desert day. The hedgehogs will put off going out as long as possible. Like their short-eared relatives, they steer clear of the hot sun. Agamas, by contrast, hunt in daytime. A bad choice of prey. The beetle protects itself with a caustic secretion which kills, if not the predator, then at least its appetite. This time, a portion this size will keep the agama going all day. Dinner or danger? Neither nor. The little Montpellier snake is just looking for some shade. In the dry northern Caucasus, spring is short and intense. The time has to be put to good use. A centipede on the hunt. These aggressive arthropods eat anything they come across, neutralizing even larger prey with their strong toxin. The young hedgehog is not immune to the effects of the centipede's poison. The decisive thing is speed and making sure it bites the right end. As desert specialists, the hedgehogs can go for long periods without water. Without food, however, they will only survive for a few days. The Saricum dune, small, isolated, and yet Russia's only real sandy desert. The origin of the dune lies close by. The valleys of the eastern foothills are lined with mighty sandstone bluffs. In the western Caucasus, canyons of limestone lead up to the high-altitude summer. At the beginning of July, many of the mountain meadows are in full bloom. A botanist's dream, the Caucasus is home to more than 6,500 kinds of plants, of which a quarter occur only here. In the shade of a glacial valley, turs are bowing to each other. They support themselves on their elbows in order to get at the salty earth. Salt is scarce at high altitude, which explains the intensity of the turs' efforts. Even though their hooves aren't suited to the task, the animals scrape away at the earth as if addicted. Has the guy next to you found a better spot? That may mean trouble. Everywhere, heads are being knocked together. A good opportunity for a trial of strength, albeit a playful one. All this activity doesn't go unnoticed. One floor up, they're also scraping and scratching. The chamois, however, aren't seeking salt, but cooling snow, softened by the sun. Which for the kids means all the fun of the slopes. The older chamois are still hesitant. The snow doesn't yet have the right consistency. Who dares to be first in the arena? Each tries to outstare the other. Then they're off, and the snowy slope becomes a dance floor. The undecided have to join in, whether they like it or not. In the end, they're all on their feet. With ever wilder moves, the chamois leap about the snowy slope. Their apparently limitless energy comes from the fact that, having adapted to life at high altitude, the animals have extra large lungs. Pirouettes only count if performed with a successful four-footed landing. Second attempt. No problem. The chamois' behavior has no deeper meaning, but appears merely to express their zest for life. Sure-footed and agile, they show what they're made of. The cumbersome tours are left with the role of spectators. Another change in the weather is brewing. From the Black Sea, heavy clouds roll over the ridge. The animals are nervous. It's very possible that they sense the rising electricity long in advance. The Western Caucasus is one of the rainiest regions in Europe. The storm breaks. First rain, then hail, and the next moment, snow. The winter makes a reappearance in the middle of summer, even though it may not look like it. For Caucasus-hardened species, not that big a deal. Morning mist in the steppes of Kalmykia. In the shade of some of the Caucasus' tallest peaks begins an offshoot of the once gigantic belt of steppes that used to extend from Mongolia to Eastern Europe. It's not easy to get a good overview in the sea of grass. For the saiga antelopes, it's the beginning of an exciting period. As ever, the herds are restlessly roaming the steppes. The females, however, are gradually separating themselves from the rest. They are heavily pregnant and not as mobile as usual. One after another, they slink off. White storks on their way north make a stopover in the steppes. Fully focused on the hunt, they ignore the grunting saigas. Missed. Gotcha. The sand lizard doesn't stand a chance. Or does it? Whatever's waggling is instinctively grabbed onto, but the lizard has merely discarded its tail. The stork has to make a snap decision: starter or main course. What's happened to the rest of my lunch? Long gone. Life goes on. Or starts anew. The first young were born last night. Well hidden and no bigger than a hare, the kids have to get by on their own. The mother only comes in the morning and evening to suckle. How they manage to find their young again in the endless steppes is a mystery. Not all the kids are steady on their feet. This one seems to be injured and abandoned. It bleats pitifully at every adult female it sees, but saigas only accept their own young. Even if a mother were to lose her kid, it wouldn't adopt an orphan. The young antelope stays hungry and lonely. For now, it can only take cover, as especially in the birthing period, danger lurks everywhere in the steppes. Its fate appears to be sealed. If the herd moves on, it is lost. Once again, an unattached mother approaches. This is the call the kid has been waiting for. The little saiga has one day to build up its strength and learn to walk. The antelopes are getting restless. Once again, it is the males doing the hustling. Nothing can hold back the saigas. Our little straggler can't afford to miss the boat. Europe's last saigas are in extreme danger of extinction, as their horns are sold in China as potency products. As it is almost impossible to prevent poaching, the proportion of males has fallen to 5%. Autumn draws into the western Caucasus as early as August. The countryside is wreathed in fog. It takes a while for the sun to dispel the persistent misty veil. The mountain wisents have once again left the forest and climbed up to the open plateau. This time it's not hunger that has led them here. It's the juggernaut's mating season, and undergrowth and brushwood just get in the way. The bulls need a good view and plenty of room. Even though the sun has finally broken through the clouds, it'll take a long time to chase the mist out of the valleys. At last, the herd girds its loins. Young bulls try to drive cows together to form little harems. This inevitably brings conflict as they argue with each other over cows being hustled from one group to another. The older bulls are less active, preferring to watch and wait. When all the cows are assembled, they sort out those that are willing to mate. Tiresome young bulls are driven off. Brown bears are no match for a fully grown wisent. This female has every reason to keep her distance. The bulls are much more aggressive than usual, and escaping across open ground is not an option. On the slope, things are getting serious. The hill is fought over as an important vantage point. While the young bulls tussle, the alpha wisent makes the decisive move. These three have sensibly decided to stay where they are and start grazing. Caucasian brown bears are mostly vegetarian. For today, the winner has been clearly established. The boss presents his massive side view. That should be enough to impress his young rivals. Time for some grooming, and wherever wisents wallow, new habitats form. A hoof print, a few dried stalks of grass, and already bumblebees can make a nest. Inside the miniature haystack, the queen is hatching her eggs. Worker bees are collecting nectar in nearby meadows brimming with flowers. The shrubs, some as tall as a man, are a paradise for insects in the late summer. Small birds are magically drawn to these gardens. Some develop astonishing hunting strategies. The warbler shoots upwards through the umbel like a diver surfacing. Attacked from below, the flies don't stand a chance. Others don't even wait for their prey to land. Late summer is the best time of year in the mountains. The periods of good weather last longer, and not every rain cloud has a whole thunderstorm in tow. It's as if nature were gathering its strength before the onset of pitiless winter. In summer, it's clear to see how the big Caucasus glaciers are shrinking. At the same time, new glaciers are forming, albeit smaller ones. A protective layer of dust and debris covers the snow, slowing down the melting process. Even today, the power of more than 1,000 glaciers shapes the Caucasus and the mountains well beyond its borders. Meltwater and heavy rains have formed wide valleys in the plains of the Caspian lowlands. In the midst of the semi-desert, lush riparian forests are formed, called tugai. Imperial eagles build their eyries in tall, single trees. Here they have an excellent lookout over their surroundings, but are themselves highly visible and open to attack as soon as they show up in the eyrie. This lesser grey shrike gets on the old eagle's nerves to such an extent that it eventually takes off again. Thousands of years of erosion and flooding have sculpted a unique landscape out of the soft sandstone. The reptile-rich canyons are the territory of short-toed snake eagles. The female has killed a highly poisonous Levantine viper. Snake eagles make a clear distinction between poisonous and non-poisonous. With poisonous snakes, they always remove the head before bringing home the dinner. The male was a bit too quick and now has to go into a holding pattern. Flash floods have hollowed out the sandstone near the bank. At the bottom of these potholes, desert ants are looking for flood victims. The locust is injured and unable to escape. Within a few minutes, the much bigger insect is overpowered and on its way to the ant's nest. The eaglet is insatiable. Its parents bring it one snake after another. But when it comes to consuming them, the chick is on its own. The young of the little owls that live below the eyrie are also waiting for provisions. Snake eagles eat their prey whole. The longer the snake, the longer it takes. Owls hunt smaller birds, insects, and reptiles. The parent bird hesitates. The eaglet needs a break. For the last time, the parent owl brings prey home. Tomorrow, the owlets will start learning to hunt for themselves. The final morsel. Autumn in the mountains is short and can turn into deepest winter at any moment. For the wisents, it's time to leave the plateau and move down to the still snow-free forests. Here, too, autumn is making its presence felt. The tall shrubs are dying, leaving rich pickings for the wisent. The furry behemoths push through the jungle of wilting vegetation. The giant hogweed dwarfs even fair-sized animals of the Caucasus. The red deer are getting more restless by the day and leave the protection of the forest. While the does try to head back to the valley, the stags drive them ever higher into the mountains. Their journey takes them through fields of rhododendrons up to the snow line. The stags, too, want to be in the open when mating. Every day, newcomers join them at 3,000 meters. In autumn, using up so much energy is risky. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the weather turns. Snow covers the plateau. In less than an hour, winter has arrived. The chamois have been taken by surprise while looking for salt, but are otherwise not bothered. Their mating season also takes place in late autumn. Chamois were made for life at high altitude. Red deer are less at home at such heights. The arduousness of the climb shows. In the thin air, this stag is straining every sinew and won't have any strength left for a duel. The old stag moves on without a fight. Europe's highest mountains, the last refuge for Caucasus wisents. A region unique in its rich diversity. The influence of these mountains reaches way beyond their borders and leaves its mark on the land between Black and Caspian Sea. The mysterious mountain world of southern Russia. The Greater Caucasus.
A 1,000-kilometer-long fortress between Europe and Asia. The Greater Caucasus. But what lies behind these mountains? A world full of surprises and almost tropical diversity. Rare animals in ancient cultural landscapes. Red-hot desert basins in the midst of icy alpine plateaus. Hunters and the hunted. It simmers here beneath the surface. Elemental forces cause mountains to explode, and in return, create paradises. Lesser Caucasus, between two seas and biblical mountains. It's an age-old question. Where does Europe end? And where does Asia begin? The search for answers leads us to the mountains between Turkey and Iran. A widely unknown highland framed by both the Black and the Caspian Sea, the Lesser Caucasus. In the north, the area borders on a vast mountain range, the Greater Caucasus, where Russia begins. The over 4,000-meter high peaks have been scarcely tapped even to this day. Rugged domes of ice and snow divide countries, habitats, and cultures. Even measured by Siberian cold fronts, there is no way through here. As of the East Caucasus, the weather is determined by the Caspian Sea. Freshly fallen snow forces many animals to leave the highlands. The pastures of the East Caucasian ibex remain buried beneath meters of snow. The herd slowly follows the tracks of the elder male. The snow-covered steep slopes pose risks even for the ibex. Their instincts lead them to the southern edges of the mountains, where the wind and the sun melts the snow first. The East Caucasus rises above the clouds like a coast in sky blue. The animals can only forage on its outermost rim. The few open high meadows and stone pits are a magnet for Caucasian snowcocks. Patches like these are essential for them. The hens search for safe nesting sites and eat continually. Very soon, they will lay up to 8 eggs. Snowcocks are monogamous. Couples stay together all their lives. He only has to win over his partner once, but a safe breeding place has to be sought after every year. Snowcocks conquer suitable territories acoustically. When the best spots have been taken, a noisy song contest gets underway. The cocks outgun one another in a resounding crescendo that is carried for miles. This is the sound of these mountains. Like the ibex, the snowcocks depend on the few snow-free pastures. Like a fata morgana, the mountains of the Lesser Caucasus appear to hover above the horizon. They are just 150 kilometers as the crow flies away. But they are worlds apart. 3,000 meters below the snowcocks, the land is dusty and hot. A deep basin separates the Caucasian Mountains over the entire length. Protected from Siberian cold air, fertile cultural landscapes accrued in Georgia and Azerbaijan. The rivers from the Caucasus are the only water veins in the arid badlands. They are seamed by lush forest pastures, the Tugai. Imperial eagles control the sky above the river valleys. Their eyries thrown on the highest poplars. Imperial eagles hunt anything that they can overpower: birds, reptiles, or small mammals. Even chickens from the nearby villages often land in the eagle's nest. These are then expertly carved beak-size by an adult. Tortoises, on the other hand, are opened like cans, and their two shell halves cleanly picked empty. The river valleys, so reminiscent of oases, have been home for herders and wild animals for millennia. Slowly, the water trickles its way down into the basin. The land is becoming continually drier. The river valleys turn into gullies. Vultures glide down with the thermal and keep close watch. The open savannas are ideal for their search flights. 3 species of vulture live here, and they all meet regularly whenever there is something worthwhile meeting for. Vultures observe each other from great distances. When one of them changes his flight pattern, the neighbors react immediately. This is why it often looks as though dozens of the huge birds meet out of the blue. In this case, though, the ground forces arrive before the rest. If vultures have brilliant eyesight, golden jackals have a very fine nose. They know that time is short. Although until now there are no vultures in sight, it won't be long before they take over the feeding ground. Until then, the work must be done. The ubiquitous magpies attempt to distract, but the pack has divided into groups. Egyptian vultures don't represent an obstacle either. Smaller than geese, the little omnivores have to be wary when in the vicinity of jackals. The first griffon vulture. The magpies can't stop him. Things are getting tight. The cinereous vulture is roughly 5 times the weight of his little relative. Very soon now, it will be teeming with them. It's high time for action. The jackals proceed skillfully. 2 of them cause a veritable riot amongst the invading vultures. During the turmoil, the third manages to grab a piece of meat. And none too soon, as now the vultures take over. The lesser the food, the more irritable the mood. Cinereous vultures dance around the carcass. None of the birds manage to swallow a few morsels undisturbed. Time and again, a fresh onslaught. The huge birds attack like kickboxers. Everything seems to be allowed. The winner eventually waddles off proudly, but even he had to fight more than he actually ate. Fresh supplies are not far behind. Without the farmers with their herds, there would not be half as many vultures in the basin between the Greater and Lesser Caucasus. Not very far away, large swarms of birds graze. Little bastards have escaped the cold of the Russian and Kazakh steppes. The semi-deserts around the Lesser Caucasus are the largest wintering areas of the small bastards. Every year, more than 100,000 of them make their way through the Trans-Caucasian basin. A wonder of bird migration at the lowest point between the two mountain ranges. "900 years ago, the world collapsed at the highest ridge of the Lesser Caucasus. An immense earthquake caused the top of Mount Caucasus to burst. Probably within seconds, millions of cubic meters of rocks created a completely new landscape. Entire valleys simply disappeared. Rivers were blocked, forests flooded, and lakes dammed. Ever since then, this land on the border to Nagorno-Karabakh has remained untouched. A cascade of crystal-clear lakes, connected via mountain streams that have found their way through the scree. The landscape is several centuries old as we see it, which, geologically, is hardly more than a few seconds. Born of a catastrophe that could repeat itself tomorrow, here in the Lesser Caucasus. Volcanic activity and earthquakes created this highland. Beneath the mountains, the Arabian Peninsula edges its way inexorably towards Eurasia. In the highland further west, The Christian-Islamic religious border transects the Lesser Caucasus. In the shadow of the twin peaks of Mount Ararat lies Armenia, a barren land and ancient cradle of Christianity. In winter, temperatures often sink below -20 degrees. Bezoar goats are the wild ancestors of all domestic goats. Today, more and more, they are being displaced by their domesticated relatives up into the inaccessible highlands. Only in winter, the animals search for protection in the lower latitudes. Despite scarce settlements, Armenia's mountains are also cultural landscapes and ancient pastures. Herds have roamed across the barren plateaus for more than 2 millennia. Ancient churches hidden in valleys, many of them over 1,000 years old. The Norovank monastery existed long before the Mongolians made their way to Europe. The Armenians were able to save their modest yet strong form of Christian belief despite all foreign domination. No one, not the Romans, Persians or Turks, managed to change that. In the course of centuries of cultural distress, social cohesion in the tiny country only grew stronger. The mountain range breathes history in its every corner. The petroglyphs of Uktazar are more than 4,000 years old. Artists in the Bronze Age scratched them into the volcanic basalt, and these have been extended over the centuries. Bezoar goats, warriors or leopards are frequent motifs in the archaic open-air gallery with its more than 1,000 works of art. On the next slope, it is as if the drawings have come alive. The Bezoar goats have moved down to snow-free latitudes. In the autumn, the otherwise solitary billy goats follow the larger herds. The obvious reason for their interest? It's the mating season, and you don't leave the ladies waiting. The senior male reviews the situation for hours. When he finds what he's looking for, he purses his upper lip in order to amplify the effect of the female pheromones. The hunt is on. Strangely enough, the males work together. Young and old can be found in the herds of the females, and it can get pretty wild. This can be very dangerous in terrain like this. As the hunt grows wilder, both sexes work up a sweat. This strenuous back and forth goes on for days. Many fall and injuries are common. After several days, many of the males are on the brink of collapse. No one knows why Bezoar goats need such strenuous foreplay. Is this how the females test their potential partner's fitness? Not everyone is convinced of the results. But so close to home, he won't take no for an answer. The tete-a-tete on the rocks rounds its course. After around 2 weeks, the male and female bezoar goats go their own ways for another year. Four and 5,000 meters high, the twin peaks of the Ararats mark the westernmost end of the Lesser Caucasus, the border to Anatolia. Jungle cats spend the entire year here in the reed beds of fish ponds. Though being carnivores, they, like all cats, often eat plants. They are hunters. Jungle cats stalk their prey on the shores in the bright light of day. They're not picky either. The cat is young and curious. As if taken for granted, she follows the tortoise along the pond. She cannot dive away in the shallow water. The attack shouldn't be taken seriously. The cat has eaten enough, and now the youngster just wants to play. The sibling is more focused. The ponds are regularly drained and then fished dry. Whoever remains in the shallow water quickly becomes an easy meal. The cats just have to wait until the catfish swims close enough to the shore. They are in their element. Jungle cats are by nature not scared of water. Fishing has never been so easy for the cats, and they don't have to waste their time strenuously hunting birds in the reeds. Once heaved on land, it's all over for the already weakened catfish. Surrounded by cultural land, the fish ponds at the foothills of Mount Ararat provide ample space for wild animals. Despite having ostensibly superior neighbors, small Armenia has been able to retain its independence for millennia. Its barren highland is the heart of the Lesser Caucasus. The steppes in the eastern foreland of Nagorno-Karabakh are the home of nomadic herders. Many families have Persian roots. Iran is just a few kilometers away. Hundreds of blue-cheeked bee-eaters swarm over well-trodden livestock paths. The birds set up their colony directly in the backyard of a small farmer family. Neither watchdogs nor other animals detains the vivid flock. It is as if the birds belong there. The reasons for this neighborhood are simple. The bee-eaters breed underground. The more open the soil, the easier it is to build nesting burrows. It's astonishing how the bee-eaters manage to excavate the sometimes meter-deep tunnels with their short feet. The most difficult is the network of roots directly below the surface. This is why someone always keeps a lookout for suitable building shells. An innocent expression. But the owner smells a rat and doesn't hesitate for long. Blue-cheeked bee-eaters exclusively hunt flying insects like dragonflies, wasps or robber flies. Their colonies can often be found near to steppe lakes or irrigation channels. Cables are gladly misused as vantage points. Food is so abundant that the bee-eaters can choose their nesting sites practically anywhere. But if you breed on the ground, you have to reckon with tenants. Desert ants specialize in leftovers. They're like an ant version of a vulture. Their orientation is driven by smell. They approach against the wind direction, enabling them to smell dead insects en route. But the grasshopper is not up for grabs yet. The giant centipede knows exactly what the ant is after. After a while, he gives up and grants the irritating guest his will. Tropical bee-eaters populate the farm like domestic fowl, a colourful side-by-side that can only occur where humans grant wild animals refuge. Golden jackals keep their distance. You don't mess around with Caucasian shepherd dogs. The small pack is on its way back to its hideaway in the irrigation ditch. They sleep off the heat of the day in the reeds. But young jackals are not keen on going to bed early. Just one more game. The two smallest play around as if they hadn't spent the entire night on the hunt. While another one hunts mosquitoes. And the fourth tries to bring reed stalks to life. Tired parents gracefully accept their fate. The first rays of sun present an astonishing sight. Whose reflection is that? Can it leap on me? Even the waves seem somehow different today. The sun's rising. Time for bed. The canal is connected to a large steppe lake, the Akgul. It's a relic of the once broad marshlands of the Kura and Arax rivers. The two main water veins of the Lesser Caucasus wash their annual high water into an extensive plain, created a unique water wilderness. As a breeding and resting place for hundreds of bird species, the Akgul is of inestimable value. All of Europe's 9 heron species, as well as the glossy ibis, nest here in the shallow lake. The abundance of fish in the lake is immense. But good balance is necessary, as reed stalks are not the very best seats. For pygmy cormorants with their webbings, a real challenge. Their advantage is in water. The feet of the herons are not designed for landings in the reeds either. The spoonbill prefers to remain in water while others try to get hold of the redemptive reed stalks above him. Each in his own way, rarely graceful. It gets quite sporty when ravenous young herons begin to shake the reed stalks. The defense of the squacco heron demands the greatest precision. On the faltering stalks, pecking can be quite dangerous. Just who of the little egrets is feeding who is something only known to the parties concerned. Things are even rougher at the neighbours. It almost borders on acrobatics, how the older birds manage to balance on 1 square centimetre of reed stalk. As so often happens at a rodeo, the ride ends abruptly. Peace returns with the evening. The reed lakes in the old marshes of the Kura and Arax rivers form the most important bird sanctuary in the entire Lesser Caucasus. Every year, the abundance of fish secures the survival of thousands of breeding and migratory birds in the dry cultural landscapes of South Azerbaijan. In the Georgian foreland of the Greater Caucasus, 2 tributaries of the Kura have created a spectacular landscape, the canyons of Vashlovani. Calm prevails in the depths of the canyon. The short-toed snake eagle endures the heat, although it's reminiscent of an oven. Should a breeze occur, he wants to store as much cool air as possible. For hours on end, the little eagle observes the flying silhouettes over the canyon. He is, as it is common for snake eagles, the only youngster in the nest. Like a fata morgana, an old bird sails aimlessly in the heat haze of the cliffs. But he doesn't land. The other parent is the one that brings the desired prey. And like all birds of prey, young snake eagles are altricial birds. Until they're ready to fly, they have no chance of getting something to drink. It's hardly worth waiting for rain in this desert ambience. Therefore, for the young eagle, every snake is doubly vital. They not only mean food, but also water. This means when he eats a lot, he quenches his thirst at the same time. Like all vertebrates, snakes consist of about 2/3 of water. It is crucial, though, to keep the liquid from the food in the body. The variety of habitats in the Lesser Caucasus region never fails to fascinate. The canyons of Vashlavani are one of these natural wonders. Despite their aridness, they still belong to the most diverse regions, stretched out between the Greater and Lesser Caucasus. Towards the east, the canyons gradually become dry steppes. They lead down into the basin of the Caspian Sea, whose coast lies 28 meters below sea level. A world as if it were on another planet. Nowhere else are there so many mud volcanoes as in the Caspian lowlands of Azerbaijan. The funnels are cold volcanoes. From the Earth's crust, clay minerals and methane forge their way to the surface. Where there are mud volcanoes, there is often oil. Huge supplies lie dormant beneath the crust of Azerbaijan and the bottom of the sea. 2 centuries ago, the people already knew of never-ending dwindling oil wells, from which the fuel could be collected in buckets. In the meantime, most of the oil is produced offshore, but the old pumps on land also never stand still. Day and night, for decades. The Shirvan National Park has the flair of an African savanna. A small group of goitered gazelles is jostling in the chill of the morning. The Shirvan semi-desert is the last important refuge for these gazelles in the Trans-Caucasus. The animals were widespread in the surrounding lowlands up until the middle of the last century. Excessive agriculture and poaching have decreased the population. Pristine desert steppes, such as in Shirvan, are very rare. Thanks to strict protection, around 2,500 of these animals inhabit Azerbaijan. Goitered gazelles live exclusively in deserts and semi-deserts and are therefore well adjusted to the scarcity of water. The only water they get is in their food. Difficult to imagine when one observes their range of forage plants. In the coastal basin of the Caspian Sea, the gazelles often graze on dry watering places and salt meadows. Many plants have adapted to the soil in the coastal area by either tolerating surplus salt or discarding it. In summer, Greek tortoises are only active in the early morning hours or evenings, for good reason. Despite being reptiles, too high temperatures are more dangerous than the cold. The bodies of the little animals heat up quickly and can overheat if she cannot find shadow somewhere. The male tortoise is overheated in an absolutely different way. The Greek tortoise is notorious for its enthusiasm in flirting. Gruff shoving and knocking is typical of the species and is designed to put hesitant females in the right mood. Once a female has been detected, no time is lost. Should, however, the chosen one face uphill, then the whole thing remains a dry run. That's better. It's much easier downhill. The cold blood becomes a firebrand. The somersault has less to do with lovemaking. If the mating was successful, soon she will lay her eggs in this dune wall. The water level of the Caspian Sea rises and sinks in irregular cycles. Land appears or disappears again in broad lagoons and salt marshes. For Caspian gulls, the areas are ideal breeding grounds. When the water recedes, legacies of the residents become visible. This obviously doesn't trouble the gulls. On the contrary, branches are rare on the non-vegetated areas. Without further ado, the new materials are integrated in the nest building. When combined with natural raw materials, this makes for denser and warmer nests, thus making a virtue out of a necessity. In the heat of the day, two goitered gazelles head for the sea. The animals are neither looking for pasture, nor are they escaping from the irritating horseflies. The water-saving kings drink. They drink in the churned-up sea. More and more animals wade through the lagoon toward the open sea. Is it all of the salt-tolerant plants in the Shirvan that make the desert animals thirsty? The gazelles don't feel very safe at all in the water. When one jumps up, the rest runs off without knowing why. The flight reflex can save lives. This time, the panic was unfounded. The wild boars are not interested in the gazelles. They are combing through the reeds in search of something edible and chew here and there on young reed straws. They spend the whole year in the reeds of the Caspian Basin. A flock of greater flamingos flies across the alpine backdrop of the Lesser Caucasus. Flamingos often fly long haul, always in search of plankton-rich, shallow water. Where has this troop come from? Africa? Central Asia? It's hard to say. The Caspian lagoons are an ideal resting place. The flamingos will filter through the bay for a few days and then fly off again. Middays, when it gets too hot, the wild boars set themselves up on the beach. There, they have everything they need and don't have to worry about attacks, neither from farmers nor from bothersome horseflies. The gazelles return to the sea. It remains a mystery why they do that and how they tolerate liters of salt water. Behind the world's largest inland sea lies Iran. The Absheron Peninsula is the last extension of the Caucasus that here, after more than 1,000 kilometers, so to speak, sinks into the Caspian Sea.